I spent my whole life delving into secrets. I love secrets. And I love to see where things are going on and listen to people. And if you listen to people, you find out a lot of information.
Ladies and gentlemen, beloved of America!
And now, ladies and gentlemen, Banal of America Audio, with your host, Tim Banal.
What is going on, my friends? This is Tim Banal of banalofamerica.com with the season finale of BOA Audio Season 4, the conclusion to the longest season of BOA Audio ever. I have some bittersweet feelings here as we close the book on Season 4. I've enjoyed the season quite a bit, but at the same time, I am totally burned out, and our usual off-season hiatus is long overdue. Now, before we dive into the meat and potatoes of the season finale here with John Lear, let me throw in some plugs and take care of some business. First of all, obviously, you want to know about when we're going to be coming back with more BOA Audio. When is BOA Audio Season 5 going to premiere? I can tell you right now that we're definitely in some uncharted territory here. Usually we run from the fall to the beginning of the summer, but this year we added on some extra episodes, really took our time, let the season percolate quite a bit. And here we are, the beginning of September, and the season finally wraps up. As such, and in light of my other big project, the Mass Mystery Weekend, we are looking at early to mid-November for the premiere of BOA Audio Season 5. I'm already working on all kinds of cool stuff for the next season of BOA Audio, so keep an eye out at the website. I know November sounds like quite a ways away, but trust me, my friends, it'll be here before you know it. The other thing I want to plug is something we mentioned at the beginning of the last episode, but I want to also put it over again here, the Mass Mystery Weekend, October 16th to the 18th in Watertown, Mass. I'm helping to put this big festivus together here in Massachusetts. An amazing array of big names are going to be here. Nick Redfern, Lauren Coleman, Jeff Belanger, Peter Robbins, Nancy Talbot, Chris Balzano, John Horgan, talking about a tremendous array of esoteric topics. It is the Mass Mystery Weekend, 3 days of really cool stuff going on up here in Massachusetts. You can find out more about the big event at massmystery.com. Pretty simple, massmystery.com. I know we have a lot of great New England listeners and folks listening on the peripheral of New England. I hope you make the trip up here in October. Tickets reasonably priced, and if you're a BOA Audio listener, get in touch with me. Let me know you're showing up at the event, and we'll try and hook you up with some cool stuff, if not some extra FaceTime with the speakers, because I definitely want to take care of the BOA Audio listeners who make the trip up here for the Mass Mystery Weekend. October 16th to the 18th, be there or be square. Look forward to meeting a ton of BOA Audio listeners. Third point of order. I'm going to try and keep going through these as fast as possible, folks. We have on the drawing board a complete and thorough Banal of America redesign. We've really got an awesome crew of folks who are hard at work already on putting together a whole new look for BOA. Of course, I'm consulting and doing a whole bunch of other stuff to shape the new BOA, as we call it now, BOA 2.0, that's the name of the project, to coincide with the premiere of BOA Audio Season 5 in early to mid-November. And I'm mentioning it here at the beginning of the show because I want your input on what you'd like to see at BOA. What kind of changes do you want on the Banal of America website? We're working on not just redesigning the homepage, but also the audio show pages and a whole bunch of other stuff. Anything you want to say about the BOA website, now's your chance. What sorts of additional features do you want to see? What do you want us to do away with? All that kind of stuff. I want to hear your input for BOA 2.0. You know how to get in touch with me. Just go to Banal of America, BINNALL of America.com, and click the contact button. That'll put you in touch with me. I want to know what you want to see as a part of BOA 2.0, and of course, BOA Audio Season 5. Now's the time for guest suggestions and all that great stuff as well. And finally, of the plugs here, we got one more left. We usually do this at the end of the show, but since this is the season finale, and I know a ton of folks are going to be listening to this landmark John Lear interview, it's the time of season here where we turn it over to you and ask you to make a donation to Banal of America and BOA Audio. What you're listening to this week is the culmination of a complete season of programs, 34 episodes, 64 hours of audio here in Season 4. That's 24 hours more than last season. 8 hours of international shows, 2 from the UK, Hong Kong, Ireland, and Sweden. And over the course of 34 episodes, hundreds of thousands of downloads of all these episodes by the amazing and awesome BOA Audio listeners. All of it came to you free of charge, absolutely free, no cost to the BOA Audio listeners. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way for me. The phone calls for all of these episodes, 64 hours worth of phone calls, 8 hours to international locations, the bandwidth, that stuff costs me money. Some folks have been helping us out throughout the year with donations. I thank them from the bottom of my heart. They are amazing people. They have helped us out tremendously. You have no idea how much your donations help. And so today we turn it over to the folks who maybe have been procrastinating, saying I'll take care of that next week, or maybe we'll donate at the end of the season. Now's the time, folks. Later has arrived. Tomorrow has arrived. How do you help us out? How do you make a donation to the program and the website? That's simple. You go to banalofamerica.com or the BOA Audio archive page, and you click the PayPal button. It's simple. They'll walk you through the process. No donation is too small. All donations go towards Banal of America and BOA Audio, keeping the program and the website commercial-free and freely available for all of our great readers and listeners the world over. All right, now that we've taken care of all that stuff, let's get down to business here, folks. We close the book on this nearly year-long saga that has been BOA Audio Season 4 with one of the more enigmatic and infamous figures in the history of UFO studies, John Lear. The season finale is a showcase of the immortals. It is where we bring on these historic figures who have shaped the world of esoterica and really give them their due. And John Lear is one of those people, my friends. He forever altered the landscape of esoterica, and that's why we have him here on the season finale to really pick his brain, not just on his theories on a lot of this stuff, but also his role in the history of UFO studies. We cover so much stuff in this 2-hour conversation, it's going to be nearly impossible for me to sum it all up here in a point-by-point thing, but we're going to try and do it nice and quick for you. In the beginning, we're going to cover the wild days of the 1980s in ufology, some of the key figures, Paul Benowitz, Bill Cooper, Bill Moore, major events, the 1989 MUFON convention in Las Vegas, Bob Lazar and the Area 51 story bursting on the scene as well. We're also going to talk about something from John's 1987 Lear briefing about an alien spaceship that allegedly crashed and was buried by the U.S. government. Some of the stuff John's been saying about souls and reincarnation and how the aliens may fit in all that. The Dulce underground base incident, human mutilations, UFO disclosure, 2012, moon anomalies, the secret space program, secret undersea connections beneath the western half of the U.S., John's theories on 9/11, exopolitics, and the state of ufology today. That's just a thumbnail look at all the different stuff we're going to be talking about here with John Lear. I'm telling you, my friends, this is definitely one you're going to want to hear. It's one I'm sure is going to be listened to and enjoyed for years to come. Another stratospheric guest here to close the season out, John Lear. Couldn't be happier with how this one turned out, and really looking forward to hearing what folks have to say about the enigmatic and infamous John Lear. For those of you who are unfamiliar with John Lear, he's got quite a bio, and I'm going to try and get it all out to you right now, so bear with me. Here is a little bit of background on John Lear. John Lear is a retired airline captain and former CIA contract pilot with over 19,000 hours of flight time, over 11,000 in command of 3 or 4 engine jet transports, has flown over 100 different types of aircraft in 60 different countries around the world. He is, of course, the son of Learjet inventor Bill Lear, and he holds more FAA airman certificates than any other FAA-certified airman. He's held 17 world records, including speed around the world in a Learjet Model 24, set in 1966, and was presented with the Professional Air Traffic Controllers Association Award for Outstanding Airmanship in 1968. John Lear's role in shaping ufology's history is beyond dispute. In 1988, he met and became friends with Bob Lazar, the government scientist who worked on the back engineering of the propulsion system of the ET UFOs at Area S4 outside of Area 51. In March of 1989, Lazar took John to an area close to Rachel, Nevada, where he witnessed the flight of a flying saucer at the exact time Lazar told him it would occur. Shortly thereafter, the Area 51 story exploded onto the UFO scene and has been a staple of ufology and esoterica ever since. Art Bell has credited John Lear with influencing the early direction of the Art Bell Show, which subsequently became Coast to Coast AM, towards focusing mainly on the esoteric. John Lear was also responsible for bringing the Area 51 story to the attention of George Knapp, thus planting the seed for Knapp's future explorations of the UFO topic as well. John Lear's website is www.thelivingmoon.com. Pretty simple, all one word, www.thelivingmoon.com. Check it out, an amazing array of material from John Lear at thelivingmoon.com. Tons of stuff to dig into and read from the amazing John Lear. And now, without any further ado, let's rock and roll. This interview was recorded on August 7th, 2009. The enigmatic and infamous John Lear on the season finale of BOA Audio Season 4.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the season finale of BOA Audio Season 4. And as the longtime listeners know, we love to end the season on a bang with a supernova of a guest. Last year, of course, Jacques Vallée. 2 years ago, Brad Steiger, and the very first year we closed out the season with Gary McKinnon. And I'm really happy to say that this year we are definitely going in the legend route as well. For people who've only been around for a while, like me, he originally was really just heard of in passing. He had been out of the field for a long time, kind of has made a comeback in the last few years, and was hugely influential in the 1980s. And into the early 90s. And if you listen to any Art Bell interviews where he talks about the early days of Coast to Coast, or you listen to any George Knapp interviews like earlier this year when he was on BOA Audio, they both cite interviews with our guest here this week as critical points in their careers for when they got into the UFO subject. So, in my opinion, he's criminally underappreciated for his influence on the field of esoterica, and I want to salute him here this week on the program and really highlight his amazing career and his thoughts on just a whole host of different esoteric topics. He is, of course, the legendary John Lear, infamous to some, beloved by many. I'm very excited to be talking to him, and I'm honored and thrilled that, he would allow us to have him here on the program for the season finale. So, John, welcome to the show. Thank you for being our season finale guest this year.
Thank you, Tim. It's a pleasure to be here.
First, let's, of course, throw out the plug, the website, thelivingmoon.com. That's your website. People should check that out for just a ton of stuff from you on there. If they haven't investigated your work yet, they must be living under a rock. I guess, we usually start out with the bio background, but you're such a legend that most people know about, a lot of what you've done in the field, and we're going to talk a lot about sort of your early years in the 85 to 92 period today, so we don't really need to get you to talk about that too much. I guess this is almost a lighthearted question, but in a way it's serious as well. Now, I know that you were in the field of ufology, per se. It's a ragtag field, if you will, anyway, from 85 to about 92, and then you got out for a while, and then you sort of have been making this comeback over the last, 4 or 5 years. As I said, kind of a lighthearted question, but kind of serious. I mean, you were out. Why would you want to come back into this mess that is, the paranormal scene and ufology as a public figure when, you could have just sort of faded to the background, done your own research, and not had to deal with all the people, that are thorns in a lot of people's sides?
Well, the truth is my daughter was in a very serious auto accident about the time that I was saying some really new stuff on the moon and things like that, and I thought that might have been a message, but I waited a year or a year and a half or however long it was, and then decided maybe it wasn't, and then decided to get back in again.
So you didn't have any reservations about having to deal with all the various cliques and factions and fiefdoms that is the UFO world?
No, they're all real interesting.
Okay. All right. Well, let's sort of like look back a little bit to the '80s period, because as I said before we started the interview, I'm a big fan of the '89 MUFON Symposium, and I was only 10 years old when that happened. So I have to go by what other people tell me as far as what was going on back then. And I guess the first sort of character from that period of time that I wanted to talk to you about was Paul Benowitz, because I've always been sort of interested in his story. I'm good friends with Greg Bishop, who wrote Project Beta, which is sort of the Benowitz story. And I know that you talked to him for quite a bit back then when he was really in the thick of it. So I guess what were your impressions of what he had to say and what happened to him, at the hands of the AFOSI?
First of all, the reason I got into all of the UFO stuff was I just by chance picked up a book by Bud Hopkins called Missing Time. And when I read that book, I felt to myself, this is real. This is real stuff that's going on.
Yeah.
So I started investigating, and then the next thing that happened is I met a friend of mine at a Southeast Asia pilots reunion, Greg Wilson, and he happened to mention that after Southeast Asia, he was transferred to Bentwaters and flew A-10s there for a while. And I said, oh, Bentwaters, that's where the famous Bentwaters incident happened, supposedly happened. He said, no, not supposedly, it did. I didn't get to see it, John, but because I was confined to quarters, but I know the guys who did. So then I started really checking around, and of course those days we didn't have an internet, and everything went by telephone or by snail mail.
Yeah.
And we had a group that met in Crestone, Colorado in '87. There was 8 of us, and Linda Howe, and I forget, Tom Adams was there, some other guys. Anyway, they introduced me to some real interesting information, and got to read the Benowitz stuff. Well, then I thought it'd be really neat to meet him, so I drove down to Albuquerque, introduced myself, and spent a couple days at his house as his guest. And he told me his whole story, and even gave me the transcripts of the Myrna Hansen interview. She was the one that was abducted, went to Dulce. And it was sure all very, very interesting, and he was very convincing. And the people that say, oh, he just was being fed information, that's not true. He came up with the information first, and then AFOSI was the one that said, oh, yeah, well, we fed it to him. And that wasn't the truth. The true thing was that all the stuff that he told about the crash on Archuleta Mountain and the story with Myrna Hansen were all very true. And one very sad note here is about 3 or 4 weeks before he died, he called me and said, John, I would like to see you. Can you come to Albuquerque? And I said, Paul, I'll try, but I'm really short on cash now. He said, well, if you can, I'd sure like to talk to you. And I didn't go, and then he passed away. And that's happened several times with very good friends of mine, so I'm trying not to make that mistake again. The friend in Las Vegas here was a very high Navy guy named Scotty Lyons. He was one of the first members of SEAL Team 6, the secret one. And he called me a couple times from a hospital bed, saying that he wasn't doing very well, but he would like to talk to me. And I didn't go and see him. And, and it happened that the day that I did plan to go see him, I called, and his wife said, he's already gone, John.
Oh, man.
So that's been happening a couple times here, and it's kind of getting irritating.
I can imagine. So kind of what you're saying here is that people shouldn't really discount the Benowitz stuff straight out of hand based on what they've kind of heard about the whole story originally.
Absolutely not. All the Benowitz stuff, as far as I'm concerned, is true.
All right. Now, have you vetted a lot of that stuff with the kind of sources that you have? To sort of like, have you heard this sort of same stuff from other people as well, where it gets to the point where that you become of that opinion?
Yeah, I was there with him for 2 or 3 days. I know some of the mistakes he made as far as identification of saucers, but there's no doubt about it. He had his house looked over the Monsanto weapons storage area, and he had movies of saucers taking off and landing, and I had a whole bunch of those, and somebody took them out of my desk drawer. I think I still have a couple of them, but they are real. He took them, and they are real saucers.
And then the other character I wanted to ask you about was Bill Cooper, who, of course, he's still wildly popular, which is really kind of surprising in a way, because I still get emails from people asking me about him and stuff, and I know that you were sort of running in the same circles with him, and you do tell a great story on that Project Camelot video interview about, kind of when you and Bill went your separate ways, and you said he had the UFO disease, and hopefully you'll talk a little bit about that as well. But I guess just tell us a little bit about Bill Cooper, your interactions with him, and what you think he was up to.
Yeah, well, that was when the internet was first starting, and Jim Spicer started up Paranet, and I got on the Paranet and started talking about the stuff, UFO stuff, and then Bill Cooper came on Paranet and said, I can verify 100% of what John's saying. I thought, boy, I got to meet this guy. So I invited him up to Vegas, and we spent 3 or 4 days together exchanging information. And the original information I heard from him, I think, was absolutely true. But he got UFO disease, and UFO disease is you get so popular with what you're saying, and you don't have any more stories, so you make them up. And Bill started making stuff up, and it really bothered me because the first time I noticed it is one of the television stations called PM Magazine came down from Salt Lake City to interview Bill and I, and we got to talking about the Excalibur project, which was the military project of designing a missile that could go at least 200 feet below the ground and then explode. It was 200 feet or 500 feet or something like that. And the other was the Krill Project. And the Krill Project was a paper written by John Grace, who was then with the Air Force, and it was and he used to live near me, and all that was a compilation of where we thought the UFO question was, the status was, and instead of naming it something like the UFO this or the UFO that, we decided to give it the name of a person. So John says, so can you think of a name? And I said, yeah, Krill, but let's spell it Krll. Well, the real Krill, Krll, was the alien that the Pentagon had for some time communicated with in the early 50s. And that story is in several of the old UFO books. But I changed the C to K, and then he came up with the initials OH, which originally didn't mean anything, but eventually Bill said that it was His Omnipotent Highness Krill, and they became the OH Krill Papers, and there was a big to-do about that. Anyway, the PM Magazine comes down, and they start asking about this, and Bill made the statement that he had read both the Krill Papers and the Excalibur Papers while he was in the Navy 10, 15 years ago. Well, a little bit later, I got him alone. I said, what in the hell are you talking about? John Grace and I wrote the Krill Papers, and Bob Lazar wrote the Excalibur Project from information he found out at Los Alamos. He says, no, I read these in the Navy, which was impossible. It was 15 years ago.
Yeah.
So we started to, we parted ways on that. And before he passed away, he called up and apologized and said, John, actually, we were both after the same thing, is to trying to get the information out. So I appreciated that.
Yeah. And then what about Rick Doty? Did you ever have any run-ins with him when he was,
Never. All I've heard is stories of Rick Doty, primarily from Linda Howe, some from Benowitz, and then the rest of the stuff you read on the Internet. And I don't follow it very much.
Yeah.
Rick Doty works for the Air Force. He does what he's told. And he got involved in that Serpa project. And I never did follow that whole thing, but supposedly he was saying a number of people were sent to Zeta Reticuli and spent 20 years there and played soccer, and all that was BS. The truth of the matter is, I heard that we sent 3 people there, and 2 people came back. One died while he was there. Of the 2 people that came back, one had extreme psychological problems, and one was completely normal. Now, I don't know whether that's true, but that's the way I heard the story. So apparently somebody did go to Zeta Reticuli, but I don't think it was 12 people, and I don't think they played soccer there.
All right, this is probably a good point for me just to sort of ask, I guess, as I said, infamous to some, and I know a lot of people just have all sorts of different opinions of you. I told a bunch of different people when we were doing the interview, and some people said you were with the government, and some people said you were being misled by the government, and some people said you just believe what you're saying. And the question, I guess, is just like, where do you get the bulk of your information from? Is it just various people on the inside, or your own research into other people's work, and then extrapolate on that, and doing your own sort of analysis, if you will?
That's about it. That's about the way that it happens. I don't have any insiders. I know Clifford Stone real well. He is kind of an insider. He knows a lot, but he doesn't tell everything. I spent a couple days down at his home. Bill English was a real insider, and of course he has disappeared. The last time I saw him was in Sunspots, I think, in New Mexico, and he was destitute and doing very poorly. But he was the one that told me the details of Grudge 13, exactly how he happened to see it, exactly what he saw, and we talked for 2 days about it. And there's just absolutely no doubt in my mind that the Grudge 13 papers are absolutely true.
Okay. And then the final guy, I guess, from that era that I wanted to talk to you about, just Bill Moore, because I know, he was sort of in that whole mix, and then we all know what happened with the 89 MUFON Symposium, and then he sort of bailed on ufology shortly thereafter. And I know that you do reference a lot of his stuff in the 87 Lear briefing, for lack of a better title. So I guess, what are your thoughts on Bill Moore and what he was up to back then during the 1980s?
Well, Bill Moore knew so much about it. When I first got into it, I honestly and truly didn't think anybody knew anything about this. I didn't even think the military knew about this. So I was always on my soapbox and saying, man, you got to believe me. This stuff is real. It's going on now. Well, of course, Bill was way ahead of me because he was hooked up with Stan Friedman, and they hooked up with Jesse Marcel. And, they were researching that stuff when I was just barely finding out that flying saucers were real. So when the MJ papers came out, and there was a lot of stuff that was excised on those papers, I was really excited. And I thought, if this is true, then everything else is true. So what I did was I knew that I had known Jimmy Doolittle ever since I was a youngster. He used to hang around the house. As a matter of fact, turns out that all these MJ guys, or some of them, used to hang around my house. And the reason is because my dad was involved in the UFO project. He was one of the primary contractors on anti-gravity, and that's in some papers in 1952, which are on the living moon. Anyway, I didn't know, I have any idea he was involved in this, but I did know Jimmy Doolittle and grew up knowing him and would see him at various conventions in the Experimental Test Pilots Association, and was always very friendly. And if ever I came across a picture of him, I would send it to him and ask him to autograph it, and he would always autograph it. And then he retired, and he lived up in Monterey Bay, Carmel. And so I knew that Jimmy was deep into the UFO thing. I don't think he was a part of MJ-12, but it was as close as them as you could get without actually having a seat on MJ-12.
Yeah.
So I thought this would be the guy that knew. So fortunately for me, my mom was still alive, and she was still in touch with Jimmy, and they would talk every once in a while. And they had been close all their lives, me and my dad, and Jimmy and his wife, Joe Doolittle. And then Joe passed away, and as I said, Jimmy lived in Monterey. So I thought, you know what I'll do? I'm going to have Mom call. The plan was this: have Mom call Jimmy and say, Jimmy, how's it going? It's Moya. Nice to talk to you. Everything's fine. I was going to ask you something. You know, John's gotten involved in this UFO thing, and I don't know whether it's good or bad, but I would like to know if Majestic is really true. And so it took about 6 months of me pleading with her to call and say, look, it's not going to hurt anything. Just call him and ask him. If he says no, fine. If he says yes, you know, it'll really mean something. So I finally got her to call, and she asked the question, and he says, yes, Moya, it is, but I can't say anything about it. So that was the key to me that while, you know, Bill Moore was accused of this and that those MJ-12 papers were real, or they were copies of real stuff. And as it turns out, all the stuff was real. Now, there's certain people say they were fakes, and but I don't believe it. I believe all the stuff that was on that Eisenhower briefing was real.
All right. And I guess what was your reaction when all the Moore revelations, I guess you could say, went down? I know it was crazy there at the 89 MUFON Symposium anyway, because they didn't want you and Bill Cooper to speak and stuff like that, and you guys talked about having a mutiny and stuff. I guess talk a little bit about that scene, because it's really, you know,
it's like really an interesting thing, because I was MUFON state director for that year, and it was my privilege to pick the speakers, and I picked Don Ecker, myself, I think it was Bill English or Clifford Stone, and I can't remember the fourth one. Anyway, they were so highly controversial that the board of directors of MUFON said, no way, look, we'll pick the speakers. So as head of the conference, I could do pretty much what I could do, and having lived in Vegas for many years, I knew a few things. So what I did is I rented a convention hall right next to the MUFON for the Sunday speakers, and I had Bill, me, and the two other guys. Bill Cooper was the fourth guy. Okay. And we just kind of outdrew them. It was crazy. I mean, so many people showed up and were so interested in it. And at the same time, you know, Bill Moore was doing his thing over at the MUFON convention.
Wow.
So,
yeah.
But anyway, everything came off great, and everybody was happy, and that was the story on the '89 MUFON convention.
Yeah, definitely. It's like Dylan Goes Electric. That for me, that 89 MUFON Symposium. If I could go back and check it out, I definitely would. Now, it sounds like around that time there was sort of developed a schism, I guess you could say, in ufology, where there were people who wanted to sort of stay with the old way of doing things, you know, and collect sightings and stuff like that, and then people who were more on your end, who were sort of trying to uncover, you know, maybe what this cover-up conspiracy was. Is that accurate, you think?
Yeah, well, see, 1988 is when I met Bob Lazar, and he went out to work with S4 and told us, yes, it was true. He'd been in the saucer. He'd seen the alien. It was all real, and we were trying to integrate that. And MUFON, of course, was still, you know, asking, well, compared to the size of your thumb, how big was it, you know? And what direction was it going, and that kind of stuff. And all of us were in, hey, guys, it's really going on. These guys are really here. And the government knows about it, and they have their testing area up at S4. So it was a clash in '88 because, see, all this had already happened by the time the MUFON convention started. And, of course, I was the first guy to alert everybody that there was a place called Area 51 Groom Lake, and then that became a big controversial subject because nobody was actually denying it, and it was on the map, and it just became well known from then.
Absolutely, yeah. As I was saying in the introduction, criminally underappreciated some of your contributions here to the field. You're one of the godfathers of Area 51. I heard you on with George Knapp and Gene Huff a few months ago on Coast to Coast, so I'm glad. Obviously, George Knapp knows and recognizes your contributions. So, you know, for the people that want to sell John Lear short, they need to learn their history of ufology, I think, regardless of the veracity of what you're saying.
The interesting thing is George Knapp is really sharp. And I had a friend here in Vegas who was a reporter for KLIS TV and Channel 8. And before that, he was with the Valley Times. And I had given him a couple of really big stories. One of them really got me in trouble because it was 1981, and I told him about the stealth fighter. And he wrote about it in an article, but he thought I said stealth fire, F-I-R-E, instead of fighter. And so the FBI poked around for a few days and grilled him, and they never came by to talk to me, but that was a kind of a big story. Anyway, the Valley Times went out of business, and Ned was invited over to KLIS, so I used to go in and give him some interesting stories that I knew about. So I walked in one day just loaded with this UFO information, and I remember sitting there. We were on one of the stages, and there were just a couple of seats there, and there was nobody around. And I gave him this pitch, and standing in kind of behind us and listening to what was going on was George Knapp. And when I got through pitching Ned Day, he said, "John, this is not possible, and the reason it's not possible is because I would have known." So I got up to leave, and George grabbed my arm and he said, "John, could you tell me a little bit about it?" And that's how it all started with George. I mean, he wanted to know about it. He wanted to know why I believed it, and he took it from there and ran.
Absolutely, yeah. I just want to jump back one touch a little bit here and just ask, when all the stuff about Bill Moore working with the government and all that came out, did it make you think twice about, you know, anything that you had come to believe up until that point?
No, I didn't think much about that. Of course, some of the stuff he passed around might have been, there was a few telexes and stuff that were kind of strange. But no, I still had the faith in the MJ-12 papers.
Okay. All right. We're sort of heading out of the 80s now, and I do want to jump ahead a little bit to something you'd said during the Camelot video, and that this is really sort of recent, I guess, but you know, you've been or you had been talking to this guy Sleeper on Above Top Secret, I believe, and you said after you talked to him, you'd come to the realization that you were wrong about the aliens harvesting us and the stuff about the souls. So I guess extrapolate a little bit more on that, because I remember you saying a lot of that stuff on Coast to Coast around 04, and I just want to get some clarification, I guess you could say, on where you stand on that whole idea of, that we're containers for souls and that they're harvesting the souls and that they go to the moon. And I think that was kind of some of the stuff you were saying back then.
I started running out of information, and people just wanted to know more and more. So I said that I felt that of course, from Bob Lazar, we knew that the aliens called us containers. Now, he didn't know what we contained, whether we're talking about DNA, whether we're talking about souls, or what, because they never told him. So then one of the always the question is, well, is there a soul? What is reincarnation? Stuff like that. And I thought, from several things I'd heard, that it was impossible to retrieve a soul from anybody that died in a shipwreck, like undersea, or in a mine. I thought it was impossible to get a soul out. And that's when Sleeper appeared. And Sleeper appeared on ATS, and he had already written 100 pages, which I had missed. And so I had to catch up. And in the first 5 pages, I thought, you know what I'm reading is the truth. And I got to page 18, and there was no doubt in my mind, this guy knew exactly what was going on, because so much of the stuff he said meshed with what I knew. So I started communicating with him on the first thread, and he said, you're wrong about the souls. They can retrieve the souls from anybody who dies anywhere. And yes, the soul is transferred to, it is, reincarnation is true, that as soon as you die, you get a quick look at your life, no judgment, but a quick look at the good things and the bad things you did, and then you get inserted back into a newborn baby about 3 days old or so. That's how it normally works. And then about that time, I started reading a book by one of the foremost remote viewers. His name has slipped my mind here for just a second. He wrote Mind Trek. Oh, McGonagall.
Yeah.
And he was tasked at one point by the Army to follow the soul of a man who had just died in a car accident near Monterey. And so he told the story that he followed the soul, and it was headed for the moon. He said as he kept following it and getting closer to the moon, he kept getting a message saying, you can't come here. This is not your place. And it kept getting louder. You can't come here. You are not allowed here. This is not your place. Until the point where he felt his very life was being threatened by following this soul. And so he broke off the chase and finished his remote viewing. Well, at the same time I was reading that, I had seen the Richard Hoagland videotape called Moon-Mars Connection #2. And in that video, he shows the huge tower on the moon that's in the middle of the Sinus Medii. And, of course, you know the moon is in rotational lock. If you look dead center at the moon, right in the center, and it never moves, there's a huge tower there. It's about 6 miles tall. It's made of a glass-type object. And I say glass, I don't know what it was, but you can see through it. And it stands on a tripod. The tripod is about 5 miles high. There's 3 support columns, and then on the top there's a huge cube, and it's 1 mile on each side. And so, thinking that McGonagall had followed the soul to the moon, I thought, well, maybe that antenna, which is pointed directly at Earth, is where the souls go. And that's where I still think they go, except Sleeper says that's not true. And of course, most of all of Sleeper's information is true, so we have a couple of things that we have agreed not to agree on. And one of them is he believes that the Apollo missions went to the moon. I am adamant and absolutely positive that Apollo missions did not go to the moon. It was all faked, and there's so much information over that there's just no doubt in my mind that Neil, Buzz, and Michael never went in Apollo 11, and none of the others went up to Apollo 17. It was all a ruse. Stanley Kubrick did the filming, the fake the filming, and there's just little incidents. For instance, the Apollo astronauts have never had a group reunion. Now, it seems odd that some of the most select people on Earth would get together once a year and a toast to their mission, but they never have.
Yeah.
And none of them talk all that much, except Edgar Mitchell. Neil doesn't say anything. Buzz says a few things. I've read all the Apollo books, and it's very detailed, and then they put on a good show, but they did not go to the moon.
Okay. All right.
So anyway, that's the story on the tower on the moon, and Sleeper says that that's not a soul collector. Soul collectors are various places, including on the moon, but mostly they're on Earth.
Okay, so the basic premise of what you're saying hasn't changed from 04. It's just the execution, I guess you'd say. Now, two of the people that I talked to before we did the interview both sort of had the same question. That was just like, you sort of already answered it, but I guess I'm going to sort of put out more of the question here. It's just like why you believe this Sleeper guy, and you sort of already kind of said that, but I guess I'm going to presume that the information that he was putting out there that you saw that made you believe that he's telling the truth and knows what he's talking about must be information that you had heard but hasn't been released yet, because otherwise he could have just been parroting what you've been saying all along. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but not only that, the stuff that he says sounds logical and real. And like I say, the first 4 or 5 pages of the thread, he said some things that really rang true, that said, this is really the truth, this is what's going on. And he wrote the 2 books, A Day with an Extraterrestrial, and the other one about Roswell, and I forget what the name of that one was, but read both of those, and they're just absolutely fascinating with real information and what really happened.
Okay. So he wrote these books. Does he write it as Sleeper, or do you know his name? Is it out there, or?
Yeah, I wrote it as Lou Baldwin.
Okay. Well, I did want to ask you about a couple elements from the 1987 Lear briefing. Hopefully that's not too long ago for you. That was, as I said, quite a while ago. I was 8 when it came out, so I just recently got reacquainted with it. You do mention in that a saucer crashed, and it was so big that the logistics to move it were impossible, so it remains buried at the site. Now, that was in 87. Has there been any change with regards to that buried saucer?
No, that saucer is up in southern it's just across the border from northern Nevada and Utah, and it was a subject of one of the conventions of crash retrievals, and I'm trying to think of the name of the little town it's at, but it's there, and they built a few little buildings there. It's something like Desert Research Institute. Now that's not it, because there is a Desert Research Institute, but that's not the name of it. It's something like that. And the aerial photographs show that something huge touchdown there that is different from any of the topography around there. So what we and also we have audio statements from a person who was allowed to go down in there, and what they did is they built 3 or 4 buildings on the perimeter, maybe, I'm trying to think, a mile away or so. And in these buildings, there's steps that go underground, and then there's a long passageway to the ship. And then you go in through this long passageway, and then you can go into the ship. And a few years ago, some people broke into there and found a sign-in book of people who had been there, and it was just amazing. Air Force, Navy, DOD, Pentagon, Army, just all kinds of military signatures and people who were involved in the military. So that's where at least one of the huge vehicles crashed and is buried.
Okay, so people in ufology kind of know where it's at, and they've done their best, I guess you could say, to get information on it.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right. And now let's talk a little bit about the Dulce base, because I know you've talked quite a bit about it, and kind of like what we were saying about the whole Benowitz stuff, a lot of people write off the Dulce base as a creation of the Benowitz era, but I gather that you've heard of the Dulce base, and more specifically the whole thing with the battle at Dulce between the EBE and the soldiers and all that stuff. I presume that you've heard this from other places outside of, sort of the original ruminations out of Benowitz.
Yeah, several places, and of course it wasn't a battle, and it wasn't the U.S. against the aliens. What happened is a Gray was giving a class to 44 U.S. scientists in this room, and somehow, by accident, a security man walked in the room with a sidearm. It was in a holster, and it had been told to everybody and ingrained in everybody's brains that no ammunition of any kind would be allowed around where a Gray was, or that man would be killed. Now, for whatever reason, this security officer walked in with a holster. I don't know, but the alien who was teaching the 44 scientists instantly killed him. And of course, all this is being seen on video by the Delta security, and say that they all came down in mass to take revenge on this one guy being killed, and they were all killed along with all the scientists, and I think there was 66 people killed. And I learned about that story from Benowitz, I think in 87 or 88, and then heard some other rumors. And then when Bob Lazar went to S4, he read the story, a briefing on the story. The only difference was it was not called Dulce. He said that they said that it happened at Area 51. And my answer to that is maybe his clearance hadn't risen high enough for him to know about Dulce, although he said he heard the word Dulce mentioned several times, people going to and people coming from Dulce. So Dulce exists. There was a firefight, but it wasn't a battle between the U.S. and the aliens. It was just one incident in which a lot of people got killed by accident.
All right, and then and I'm referencing here the 87 Lear briefing, which I presume is kind of like what you were saying earlier about the Krill paper, sort of a state of affairs of where you were at, or where you thought the field was at in 87. That's a kind of a pretty good assumption.
Exactly. That was the first thing I wrote. And, hey, guys, you're not going to believe this, but, and then I started telling all the stuff that I thought I knew.
Okay, yeah. And there you laid out that in 84, the government, or the MJ-12, the people who know what's going on, started to panic because they realized that they had gotten the raw end of the deal with the aliens, and that the aliens weren't on our side, and that the government had sold the aliens to the world as friendly via ET and Close Encounters. And that's what you said went on in 84. Here we are like 25 years later. What do you think the state of affairs is with regards to, the government's perspective on the alien presence?
I don't know what they know, but the truth is exactly what Sleeper says, is that the Greys are watchers, and they're in charge of the containers. They have nothing to do with the soul, even though if they're asked to, they can change souls from one body to another or put a soul someplace, but that's not their primary job. Their primary job is similar to a lube and oil, check the fan belt, check the battery level, fluid level, check the oil filter, that kind of stuff. The first check you get is when you're 3 or 4 years old. Second check is when you're 7 or 8. The third check is when you're 13 or 14. And they actually pick you up and take you to the moon, and you stay there for an hour or so for this check, and then bring you back. And it happens to everybody, just not, like 1 in 10 and 1 in 5 or a few special people. It happens to every single person on this earth.
They get taken to the moon.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. And I guess, what do you base this information on is the best, response, I guess, for that?
Like I said, the McMonagle story and members of my family who have vivid, complete memories of being taken to and examined on the moon.
Okay.
The underground bases on the moon.
All right. So then I guess, from what you're saying now then, so they're not necessarily bad. They're more apathetic, I guess you could say, about the human race, or I don't know. What's your take on that?
On the Greys?
Yeah.
They're neither good nor bad. They have a job to do, and their job is to take care of the containers, to see that we don't die before where everything is written. Everything has been planned. Nothing happens by accident. And if somebody happens to get killed or seriously injured, and it's not in the plan, there's a cleanup crew of Greys that go in and fix it by suspending time and doing different times. It's called the cleanup crew, and they try and salvage to put things back the way they were supposed to go.
Interesting. I'm trying to wrap my head around that. So you mean what do you mean if someone dies by accident, like in a car accident, or someone of more importance?
Yeah. If a guy, your life is written out, exactly what you're going to do, exactly when you're going to die, exactly what's going to happen in your whole life, and you get to make choices here and there, but basically you're going to follow the plan. And if you're not following the plan, life is going to be very, very difficult for you. But most people find their way and find what they feel more comfortable doing, and what they feel more comfortable doing is what is already written. If they happen to get involved in a car accident or some kind of accident that wasn't in the plan, the cleanup crew comes in and tries to salvage it.
All right, but if it was planned, then I guess they're just dead that way.
Yeah, when it's your time to die, you're going to die. It doesn't care. It doesn't matter how much you drink, how many cigarettes you smoke, how many vegetables you eat, how many days, how many hours you run a day, how healthy you are. None of that matters. The only thing that matters is when it's your turn to die, you're going, man.
Nice. That's the best news I've heard all summer. I'm going to take that to heart and have some beers tonight.
Don't worry about it, because as soon as you die, you'll be given a complete review of your life. And it's amazing every little teeny, tiny slight that you've ever done to anybody is shown to you. And there's billions of them. And every good thing that you've done is shown to you. And there's billions of them. And it only takes a short time to do this. And you're not judged. Nobody says, no, you shouldn't do that. Now, this was good. This was bad. all you're done is they show you, let you make your own judgment.
Yeah.
And then immediately you're put back in a newborn baby, and you start all over again. And the bottom line is to learn to live your life with integrity, and to learn to live your life without envy, hate, or greed. And that's the whole bottom line of life. And so as soon as you learn that, then you get to go out and play with adults. And by playing with the adults, our solar system has more people in it than you can imagine. Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Neptune, Pluto, all those planets are just chock full of millions of people. And not only the planets, but the satellites of all the planets are chock full of millions and millions of people. And they're going back and forth all the time and doing all kinds of things. And when you learn to live your life with integrity and to live it without envy, hate, or greed, then you get to go out and see all that stuff.
Yeah.
And how amazing it is and how neat it is. If you can imagine heaven, then exponentially multiply that by 1,000, and that's what it's like when you finally graduate. But you can't graduate. There's no way to cheat. They'll know when you're ready. They'll know when you've learned to live your life with integrity and without envy, hate, or greed. And when you do, you get to go play with the big boys.
Nice. Now, I'm just going to throw the reincarnation skeptic question out at you that most of the skeptics use, and I'm really not a pro or con reincarnation guy anyway, so I don't have a dog in this fight, so don't worry about that. But the whole idea that it's like mathematically impossible for reincarnation because the population keeps getting bigger, and therefore where all these extra souls or whatever coming from. What's your take on that whole argument?
They're made. Don't worry, there's plenty of souls to go around. They keep making them.
All right, sounds good.
Yeah, don't worry about it. There's plenty of souls.
And now the only other thing from the 87 Lear briefing I want to talk to you about is just this. You mentioned that they'd been planning since '68 a series of documentaries to reveal the truth about UFOs. This is the MJ-12 and those in the know, if you will. Obviously, you don't know what their plans are, but where do you think they stand on planning on to tell people about this? I've heard about the gradual disclosure concept for a while, but
I forgot where I got that information, but the truth is there is going to be no disclosure for at least 4 or 5 generations. The government is not going to go out and say, well, truth is flying saucers are real and we even met some aliens. That will not happen for several generations, maybe 4 or 5 generations. And then we'll be slowly indoctrinated. There's no reason to indoctrinate anybody now. They're not ready for it. They're really not ready for the information. There's some, like Stephen Bassett, who think it's our right to know, who's out there. Well, everything is so big out there, people couldn't even imagine. For instance, there's a billion Earths, just like this one, with people just like us. Some are more advanced, some are less advanced. But the universe is infinite, and by infinite, it means there is no end. It didn't start 18 billion years ago. There was no Big Bang. It was always there.
So no disclosure. Now you say 4 or 5 generations. Is that from now, or is that including, the 3 previous, that have been around since this whole thing started, as far as, in the contemporary time?
No, 4 or 5 generations from now.
Oh, geez.
Each generation was, 30, 40 years?
Yeah, so you and I are shit out of luck pretty much.
Yep.
Oh, man. Well, that's sort of like something I was thinking about the other day, too, as far as the disclosure thing goes. I feel sometimes like this thing, and you kind of mentioned this, and I'm moving a little bit into the Art Bell Lear briefing from the fall of '03, and you say it was the secrecy is so out of control that most people want immunity and want out. There's so much secrecy that so many and so many double and triple blinds in place that it's unlikely that this thing can ever be dismantled. I wonder sometimes if the information and all this stuff sort of started coming to, humans, I guess you could say, in full force, in the 30s and 40s and maybe earlier than that, but that's sort of the general starting point. And I sometimes wonder just sometimes if the chain of evidence and information is so skewed and ragged, if you will, that I wonder if anyone really knows truly what's going on anymore anyway. Like, all that original generation of guys from original MJ-12, they're long gone, and how well the information actually gets passed from one generation to the next.
Yeah, they're long gone, and those ideas are long gone. And the truth is, the bad guys are in charge now. They won't be in charge forever, but Earth will never be a peace-loving planet ever. It's here, and a lot of bad guys are sent here to try and improve themselves. But it will never be a good place. And even if the good guys were in control, there's always going to be conflict somewhere. But right now, the bad guys are in control, and there's nothing we can do about it. And I can tell you that 9/11 was a ruse. They killed 3,000 people unnecessarily. There were no Arabs. We didn't have a fight with any Muslims. No, there was no Osama bin Laden organized that thing. It was all organized internally and done extremely well by the guys at the top.
Yeah.
So if they're going to do that, you can be pretty well assured that there's going to be no disclosure. And if there is a disclosure, it'll be a false one. It'll be aliens are here, and they have asked us to tell you, turn in your guns as quickly as possible, and, BS like that.
Yeah. We'll get into that in a little bit, because I do have what you're saying here in the notes for sure, because I do want to talk to you about 9/11 and this false flag alien invasion that you've mentioned before. But the only other thing I wanted to ask you about here from the 2003 Lear briefing is the human mutilations, because I have rarely ever heard anything about human mutilations, but you talk quite a bit about them in various places. So I guess talk a little bit about, human mutilations, how often they go on, and what might be the reasoning behind that whole thing.
I don't know. I know that they go on. I know that it's very, very secret. I don't think it's the Greys that do it. It's some of the other aliens. And some people, say, well, there's 5 or 6 species that we know about and work with, and some say there's 90. But the fact is there are billions of different aliens. Every kind of monster, every kind of figure that you can think of exists as far as aliens.
Wow.
So, yeah, there are some pretty nasty people out there, and they do some pretty nasty things, but it's not the Greys.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about 2012. I know that you think it's a scam, and I'm pretty much in agreement with you on that. I sometimes wonder if it's in part a scam to undermine all the work that people in the paranormal world are doing, because it's going to turn into sort of a Y2K effect. Like maybe this is some kind of big setup to knock us a few steps back. What do you think?
I don't know what the reason is. I believe Sleeper. He says nothing is going to happen of that kind. He said there will be the continuous little wars that we have. There might even be a nuclear war, but there's going to be no crashing planets, no uplifting of humans, nothing that would affect the entire world. It's just BS, and I keep hearing it. The best story is the NASA scientist that was on his deathbed, and he told his family that he couldn't tell them much, but he could tell them that something was on the way and going to collide with Earth. That's all BS. They're fed all that stuff. It ain't going to happen.
And then Now, I don't know if you were saying specifically in 2012, but you do say that you think this false flag alien attack thing is going to happen. You say absolutely that's what they're probably going to do. So, now, do you think that's going to be 2012 or just some other, at any time, pretty much?
No, they're not going to do it. There's not going to be any alien attack coming along in the next many, many, many generations. There should be no reason for any alien attack.
I mean, a false flag, the hologrammed alien attack that you mentioned in the...
Yeah, that I mentioned. Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. Of course, Werner von Braun's secretary said that would be the last of the four things that were going to happen, but I don't believe that anymore.
People hang on his every word, even the prepositions. He could disarm you with his looks or his hands. Either way, he can speak French, in Russian. He is the most interesting man in the world.
You're listening to Banal of America Audio.
I don't always drink beer, but when I do, I prefer Dos Equis. Stay thirsty, my friends.
Let's talk a little bit about your interest in the moon, of course. You're big, obviously, the website, thelivingmoon.com. You're really big into what's going on over there on the moon. For starters, this is less to do with the moon, but it's within the same realm. How do you think they're going to handle commercial spaceflight with regards to covering up UFOs? Because you'd presume that once these civilians start being able to travel into space, then it's going to be harder to cover up any sort of UFO activity or even, U.S. UFOs, if you will.
Well, as far as I know, nobody's been to the moon, and the reason is the Van Allen belt extends from 450 miles out to 25,000 miles, and the people that say, well, the Apollo went through it so fast it didn't make any difference, that's not true. That belt there, that Van Allen belt, was put there for one specific reason, and that was to keep us from going anywhere. This is a jail, and it's a prison, and we're going to stay here until we learn to live our lives with integrity and without envy, hate, and greed. And we're not going to be spreading our type of democracy to any other place because of the type it is. Like I'm saying, like the type of democracy we're trying to spread to Iraq.
Yeah.
We aren't going to be going anywhere now. We will take little steps. There have been many thousands, maybe even millions of people taken to the moon, but they're guests. And they're shown what's up there and taken for rides and shown all the cool stuff there. But they don't talk about it a lot. There's only a few books out where guys are talking about it. One was Howard Menger. Howard was taken to the moon in 1956, and he spent about 5 days there. They took him on a tour and showed him all the industry and all the interesting stuff that was up there. And I really had a good time. And he wrote the book From Outer Space. I think it's called From Outer Space to You. They're hard to get. And Howard died, I think, last April or last March. I used to talk to him occasionally to get details on the moon. For instance, I wanted to know what the color of the sky is, the daytime sky, and he says it's a saffron yellow. So all the pictures that I publish of the moon, I always put a saffron yellow sky. As a matter of fact, I even sent a number of swatches with different shades of saffron so that he could pick the exact one. And I think on the Living Moon we have the actual set of swatches where he put his X on. That was the color that he saw during the daytime.
Okay. Now you're saying that none of us, no humans or whatever, aside from what you're saying earlier about the souls and all that stuff as babies going to the moon, what about a secret space program? Are there people, in a secret space program going to the moon, or they can't get through the Van Allen belts either?
No, my opinion is I don't think we've been to the moon yet. Now, possibly we have. We do have a secret space program. It's under the United States Strategic Space Command. I think it's USS Space Command. But anyway, there's currently, well, let me ask you first. How many astronauts do you think are current and qualified? And by current, taken a rocket flight and at least once. How many astronauts do you think are current and qualified in the United States?
To like go up in the shuttle, you mean?
For anything.
I don't know, maybe 20?
There's 5,000 current astronauts qualified, because we have so much stuff that's going on. We have man-rated rockets that nobody knows anything about that launch every day, and the shuttle is just kind of a cover. Every couple of months it goes up. And as a matter of fact, last September, I've never been that much interested in the shuttle. You know, it goes up and comes down, and big deal. But I got to thinking, watching it go up, and the 3 days it takes to catch up with the International Space Station. Now, we know the International Space Station has an inclination of 50.6 degrees. So if we want the shuttle to match it, the shuttle has to match 50.6 degrees. And if we want it to catch up with the shuttle, we have to wait, since it takes the shuttle 9.5 minutes to get to orbit. We should wait until the shuttle is 9.5 minutes behind us, coming our way to Cape Canaveral, and then launch the shuttle, and it should be there in 9 minutes. But for some reason, for the last 25 years, it's taken 3 days for it to catch up. Same thing on undocking and deorbiting. When they undock from the space shuttle, it should take 54 minutes before landing at Cape Kennedy. But it doesn't. It takes 2 days. So when I was working above topsecret.com and working with those guys, I heard all kinds of excuses about why it took so long to get back. They said, well, first of all, they've been working 10 days straight on the shuttle, and they need 2 8-hour rest periods, and then they've got to do all their exercises, and then they've got to do their checklists. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, this is bull. And so then we started talking about, why did it take 3 days to catch up? I mean, after 25 years, couldn't we just figure out when to launch it so it would arrive in orbit at about the same time the ISS passed over? Oh, well, no, we can never get it aligned, and it always takes 3 days. Well, we got to checking around, and we had a good friend who had a really inside website from Russia, and we found out that just before the space shuttle ever arrives at the ISS, that 2 Russian spaceships, I forget what they're called, not Soyuz, it's the other one. But anyway, 2 of those arrived there at the ISS. So when we put the whole mess together and figured out, looked at the manifest, and what's on the manifest, which is primarily food, we figured out what they're doing is, when they take off, we have 8 or 10, possibly 12 secret orbiting weapon satellites. And what they're doing is they're stopping at each one to drop off a little food. And that takes them 3 days to get to all, maybe 6 of them. And then what they do is, when they get to the International Space Station, those Soviet rockets have brought up more food, and what tipped us off was fruit. You got to have fruit if there's going to be people living for any length of time in space. So that fruit is loaded onto the shuttle, and then the reason it takes to get 2 days back is they've got 3 or 4 more weapons orbiting satellites to feed, to drop food off at. And that's what they're doing.
Interesting. Okay, so that is within the realm of a secret space program.
You bet.
Yeah. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around sort of where we're at as far as what you think was going on then with the Apollo things. I know you've talked quite a bit about the 4th astronaut that was in Apollo 1. and how he died and how they covered that all up. Now, was that the plan going forward all the way through each of the Apollo missions? Was it always a fourth man in there, or did they abandon that after that?
No, there was always a fourth man in there, and it was always Joe Shea. And Joe Shea just happened to be, he was the head of the Apollo program, and he happened to be in New York that day. Nobody knows exactly why he was in New York, but we know that the murder of Virgil Grissom was specific. It was specific because they wanted to tell everybody else, all the astronauts, look, keep your mouth shut or this is going to happen to you. And that's why they did that. They did have one of the secret astronauts in there in Joe Shea's place. But the reason they put those guys in there is they had an extra headset and mic in there that he could communicate and help work out the problems. They just didn't let those three guys suffer through the problems themselves. They needed help on these things. And of course, the whole thing was a farce anyway. There was never going to be any shot to the moon. Probably what they did is they shot off the Saturn V as if there was astronauts on it, and then hustled the astronauts over to Johnston Island, which is in the middle of the Pacific, with an Apollo command module. And then when it was time for them to come back, they put them in the Apollo command module, put the whole thing in a C-5A, went up, and pushed them out. And, of course, the three parachutes blossomed. And, of course, all the public really saw was the Saturn V takeoff and the parachutes bringing it down. That's all they saw. Now, one of the interesting things is there's a video on YouTube, and it's a picture of Neil and Buzz and Michael getting out of the helicopter that just picked them up from Apollo 11 and landed them on the deck of the Hornet. And they put up some stairs, and there was like about 5 or 6 steps, 5 or 6 flights that they had to get down to get to the deck. And then the quarantine vehicle was about maybe 50 or 60 feet away, and there was a door in that. Well, if you look at that very carefully, you see those astronauts jump down those steps, each one of them barely holding onto the handrail, walking briskly across the deck and swinging themselves into the door of the quarantine vehicle. Now, you tell me anybody that's been 11 days in no gravity on their back that could swing down a set of stairs and walk across the deck without wobbling a little bit. I'd like to know about it.
Yeah.
The Russians had a picture of the guy who paid $20 million to go up there, and of course the pictures of him, he could hardly walk. He was wobbly for a couple days.
Yeah.
And that's what happens to you. But that's only one of the little secret indications that they screwed up on.
Now, what do you think the motivation was then to fake all this stuff? Just to freak out the Russians, or because they already had sort of committed to doing it and they didn't want to lose face to the American public, so they just sort of faked it? Or what do you think the motivation was behind
we've always been allied with the Russians. The Russians have always been just a little bit ahead of us. They were the first ones to the moon. They were the first ones to photograph the moon. They were the first ones to set a vehicle down on the moon, take a scoop, and bring it back. They've always been just a little bit ahead of us. The reason we did all of this was for the money to build the secret space program, because between 1966 and 1970 is when they were launching the first pieces of orbiting satellite that would become these weapons, and they're fantastic weapons that they use.
Okay, so if there is a secret space program, it's more geared towards weapon development than exploration.
Right.
Okay. You don't really know either way, I guess, then if this if there is a secret space program, if it can get through the radiation belts.
Yeah, they don't have to because it's 450 miles out, and the ISS is, I think, 210 miles, and these secret satellite stations are no more than that.
Okay, so it's like all
they don't have
contained
to go through the belt.
within that bubble anyway.
Now, one of those weapons is a weapon that is a weapon that disassociates molecules. In other words, it can take anything apart down to its little element, and that's what reduced both of the World Trade Centers to nothing. Now, if you go to any demolition expert and say, okay, let's have a 100-story building. If we do this demolition perfect, how much of that building is going to be left? And they said, well, demolition just demolishes it. It doesn't disintegrate it, so you're going to have about 14 stories left. So of the 110 stories of the World Trade Center, we know that there was only barely one story left, but there was clouds of dust that was 80 microns in size. So one of those weapons that we put up there was aimed at both World Trade Centers. It got one about a little before 10 and one at, I think, 20 after 10.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that you are right on the same pace as I am here with the notes. So that's right at the next point I was going to ask. Talk a little bit about your theory here that the 9/11 airplanes, for lack of a better term, were holographs.
Yeah, I get a lot of criticism for that. Very, very little support because, I spent my whole life delving into secrets. I love secrets. And I love to see where things are going on and listen to people. And if you listen to people, you find out a lot of information. And I've been here since 1973 here in Las Vegas. And this, of course, is the center of secrecy. And no matter where you go or who you go, if you just listen carefully, you'll find one little teeny piece of information that fits in there. Well, a few years ago, I was at the San Jose UFO conference, and I stopped on my way back in to see Norm Berggren.
Okay.
He was a scientist with Lockheed for 20 years. He knew a lot of information, and he had been retired about 10 years. And he wrote The Ringmakers of Saturn, and he's the one that used the Voyager photos to find the spaceship that's floating in the rings of Saturn that's 30,000 miles long and 2,400 miles in diameter. And he's got pictures and data. I mean, this guy is a real intelligent guy. He's approaching 80 now, and he's getting up there in years, but I go by every year to see him. And about 4 years ago, I went to see him, and in our conversation, I mentioned that I thought that the World Trade Center, the airplanes might have been holograms. He says, well, I wouldn't doubt it, because I'll tell you why, John. He said, about 15 years ago, I was going to work with a friend of mine down the Los Altos. He lived in Los Altos Hills, and he takes the Bayshore Freeway down to Sunnyvale, where Lockheed was, where he worked. Mm-hmm. And he says, we're driving along in the morning, about, 8 o'clock in the morning, bright, sunshiny day. And he said, we look up, and here, 200 feet above the car, is a 747. Now, there is absolutely no way a 747 should be there, because San Francisco is 30 miles to the north. San Jose is, another 15, 20 miles to the south. And no reason for a Boeing 747 to be 200 feet above their car. And he said they both watched it for about 15 seconds in utter amazement, and then it just flashed out.
Yeah, hologram.
It was a hologram. And then I had a friend from New York, a lady who's in the advertising business, and actually in the movie casting business. She has 2 degrees from Harvard, one in astrophysics, and I forget the other one was. But she is a brain. But she didn't want to go into either of those fields. She wanted to go into movie casting. So anyway, she ended up out here with my wife, who's a movie caster. She is CSA, Casting Society of America member for many, many years, and casts a lot of the movies that come to Vegas, like Casino and the Mars Attacks, and a lot of those movies.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, we were having dinner together, and we started talking about holograms, and she says, I'll tell you my story about holograms. She said, in 2001, I was invited to a very special showing and demonstration called The Future of Television. And she said there weren't more than 30 of us, and we were in a very, very plush auditorium, very small auditorium, but it was very plush, very well lighted. There was big names there. I don't have to tell you the names because you know them instantly, but there were some pretty high-powered people there. And what they did is a guy came from backstage, Middle European or older European, white hair, glasses, talked with a thick accent, came up to the podium and started giving a lecture about television. And he started back when they invented the, what do you call it?
Cathode tubes and that stuff.
Cathode tube. And how it advanced from there. And it was kind of a boring, it was nothing what they were expecting. And this guy would step off the podium, off the stage, down the steps, walk up the aisle, looking at the people, wiping his glasses, cleaning his glasses with his handkerchief, then walk back, then walk up the stairs, walk up to the podium, and then after 20 minutes, it was over. He says, "Thank you very much," and then he disappeared. And what it was a demonstration of how far holograms are coming. In other words, the next generation of TV will be holographic, that you don't have a tube. You'll have a little control that you can put the whole picture wherever you want. You can put it on the table. You can put it on the floor. You can put it on your desk. You can make it bigger, smaller, whatever you want. And since the movie industry had that in 2001, you can imagine when the military had it, which was probably 10 to 15 years before that.
Absolutely. Now, I remember you telling that story in the video. Like, who put on that presentation? Some movie studio or?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was the future of television.
Interesting. Okay. Was it like secret? Because I never heard anything about that till I heard your story.
I don't know. She didn't say, and I didn't ask her whether it was secret. I don't know whether they were told not to mention anything about it, but she didn't have any qualms telling me the story.
Yeah, because you'd think you'd hear about it, but I guess if it was all bigwigs and stuff, you never know how it works out there. So, is there a connection between the 9/11 events and the whole UFO issue?
No, the 9/11 event was for 4 or 5 reasons. Number one, we wanted to invade Afghanistan, and we needed to make the Arabs, Muslims, look like our enemy, and we needed to make people think that 19 Arabs crashed in our buildings, killed all our people, and we were going to go get them. So we went into Afghanistan and invaded Afghanistan in 2003. Well, we weren't after the Arabs. What we were after is the poppy growing area of the Hindu Kush. The Hindu Kush extends from the middle of Afghanistan up into that northeast corridor. Nowhere else, not in the south, not in the north, but from the middle of Afghanistan up to that northeast corridor that's called the Hindu Kush is perfect growing area. It's perfect temperature and perfect altitude. And in 2001, the world output percentage of Afghanistan of poppy and poppy-related, opium-related products was 12%. In 2007, it was 95%. Now, the reason it was 95% is we went in and we took it over. We showed them how to cultivate. showed them how to harvest, showed them how to package, and then, of course, we took over the distribution and sale.
Yeah.
And, of course, all of this is used for black projects. And that was the main reason that we attacked Afghanistan, and it still remains the main reason. And a few days ago, there was an article in the New York Times that said we were going to send 50,000 Marines into the Helmand, and there was 2 other provinces. And so I looked it up, and they're in the south part of Afghanistan. Oh, they were going to send them there to wipe out the opium production, which was financing the Taliban and the Al-Qaeda armies. And it was like it was going to be a big deal. Well, it just happens that the places they're going, there aren't any poppies growing there because it's not a good area to grow. So it was a good story, but it wouldn't get past the truth because the real poppy area is growing in the northeast of Afghanistan. And another interesting story is I had a B-1 pilot over for dinner the other day that had flew B-1s in Afghanistan, and when I was telling the story, he slapped the table and he says, "No wonder." And I said, "No wonder what?" He says, "I keep wondering why there's a no-fly area over the Hindu Kush, and I keep telling my commander that that's where the poppies are growing. You can see them, there's thousands of acres of them."
Yeah.
And, he never got an answer from his commander, but he says now it all comes together. That's why there's a no-fly area in the Hindu Kush.
Okay, so that's one element behind the whole 9/11 thing. And
yeah, the other element was to steal the oil from Iraq, and also to make, we needed 5 major bases in Iraq so that we can attack Iran. The reason we want to attack Iran is because the pipeline that goes from the Caspian Sea down to the Persian Gulf goes right through eastern Iran and Afghanistan. And we don't want to share any of that oil with either of those or give them any money. So the attack would be to keep them away from that pipeline, if the attack ever comes.
Okay, yeah. So no real UFO connection, but we're going to presume, I guess, that the people behind 9/11 are also the people with their finger on the UFO information. I hope, unless there's 2 groups.
Yeah. They're pretty much the bad guys right now.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the undersea tubes that you've been talking about a little bit. And I'd never heard of this whole thing. And you told a story about a little lake there in Nevada and how it is a submarine base and acts as a conduit to the Pacific Ocean. And it runs underneath the land out to the Pacific Ocean.
The Pacific Ocean underlies California, Nevada, Oregon, part of Idaho, part of Arizona. And there's an entrance to this place just north of Fort Ord near Monterey Bay that the submarines can just dive down and go under all these places. And it just happens that, for 30 years I've been driving back and forth to Reno. My folks moved up there in the late 60s, and I was always driving back and forth, and I'd always pass this town, which is about halfway, called Hawthorne. And it's just a little town. There can't be more than 30,000 people, if that live there. But on one side of the road, as you're going north, on the left side, there's a guard gate, and a sign says Naval Undersea Warfare Center. And then on the other side, there's Army Ammunition Depot. And I could never figure out what the connection was here. But in the course of, the 40 years that I flew, every once in a while, some guy would say, there's a big submarine base down there. And there's a little lake, Walker Lake, can't be 15 miles long and can't be over 100 feet deep. And so there can't be any submarines there. And a few years ago, I ran into a guy who put the whole puzzle together, and he said what it is there's a channel from just north of Fort Ord that the subs go to, and they go directly underneath Hawthorne. And there's an elevator that goes down 4,300 feet to the level of the Pacific Ocean. And what they do is, this is the main ordnance base for the Navy, because that what's called the Army Depot, they make all the sophisticated Navy ordnance, and all they have to do is just drive across the road and go to the building where the elevator is and ship it down. And then there's a huge base. I don't know how many subs are there, but probably 10, 15 that come in, and what they do is just load them up with these different pieces of ordnance and nukes and whatever they're going to put in there, and then they sail back out to the Pacific.
Just water under there.
Yeah, it's the Pacific Ocean under there.
Interesting. Is it like that all the way across America, you think?
Possible. Because just the other day, I was told that there's a base in St. Louis, sub-base in St. Louis, and a sub-base, big sub-base in Memphis, Tennessee. And coincidentally, there's a large naval base there. Now, the base in St. Louis was a place where they took the nukes for experimental purposes, and a friend's father took him one day and showed him where the entrance was. And then ran into another guy who said, well, now that makes sense. And I said, what makes sense? He says, why they're always dredging the middle of the Mississippi. He said the barges, only go down 3 or 4 feet, but they dredge the thing to 80 feet. And I never could figure out why that had to be so deep. But if there's nuke submarines coming up all the time, then that's the reason why it's got to be dredged that deep.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. Yeah, and you had mentioned in the video there that you asked the guy if he'd been down in the tubes, and that you should ask, that's the thing to ask Navy guys. I guess, I presume then you'd heard about the whole tubes idea previous to meeting this guy.
Oh, for 30 years. They're not tubes. It's an ocean that's under there.
Okay.
What he told me is where the channels were, the main channels to under Hawthorne.
Yeah.
It's not tubes of water. It's a whole ocean underlies California, Nevada, probably goes all the way to the East Coast.
Interesting.
But anyway, when I asked him, my first question I ask any Navy guy is, been down in the tubes lately? And some of them will say, tubes? What tubes? You mean surfing tubes? I don't know what you're talking about. And this guy just quietly said, every day.
All right. I'll keep that in mind. If I run into a Navy guy, I'll try and use that on him. Now, I got a couple Bob Lazar questions for you that people actually wanted me to ask you. I know that, I guess the first question, this is my question. Do you ever get tired of answering Bob's questions? Because Bob doesn't really do too many interviews, and you've sort of become the caretaker of the Bob Lazar story in a lot of ways. How do you feel about that whole turn of events?
Yeah, I never get tired of it.
All right.
I'm happy to tell, because it was such an exciting period for me, the most exciting 2 years of my life, and he hasn't sent me an email for a year. He lives in Langsburg, Michigan now, and has his business, United Nuclear, back there, and he's now one of the world's largest scientific suppliers for colleges and universities and institutes of higher learning.
Okay.
And he's so busy with his business that he doesn't have time to email anybody. But I had my 65th birthday a year and a half ago on December 4th, and he showed up at the door, and it was really great for him to take the time. At that time, he lived in Albuquerque. To take the time to come and surprise me and be at my 65th birthday.
Yeah. Well, it seems like he's a cool guy. I don't begrudge him or anything, and much like the other stuff, I don't really have a dog in any of these fights. Really, I'm an observer on the whole thing. The questions that people had sent to me were that in the video you said that Lazar's back working with the government. Is that still accurate, you think?
Well, the reason I said that is because halfway through the party, he said, I'll show you something, and he took out a Los Alamos badge that was current.
Okay.
And I said, you back working with him? He said, yeah, finally. And then he told a little story. He said that when he was being briefed about coming back, the one guy said, now, Bob, we're not going to have any more trouble with you, are we?
All right. And then the other question is, and I'll just read this guy's question, so that way you don't think that I'm the one saying this. Whatever happened to the Element 116 that Bob Lazar supposedly had at his house? And this is all in caps, don't say no comment. Apparently you said no comment when asked about this by Art Bell, so I figured I'd ask you about this question here, Element 116 that Lazar supposedly had at his house.
The Element 115, we had 3 pieces of them, and they were already machined. And I have always said that Bob stole them from Groom Blank, but of course nobody could steal anything from there because you're weighed and searched and everything. We got them from someplace else. But there are 3 pieces, and one night somebody broke into his house and stole 2 of them. He had another one hidden, and so there's still 1 piece out there, and I don't have any comment on that.
Okay, that's fine. Well, I guess you did sort of just reflect a little bit on that time. You said the 2 most exciting years of your life. Does it hurt in a way that Bob's sort of been dragged through the mud for so long about the whole thing? Because it sounds like, you were there, and your perspective on it is I'm sure much clearer and sharper, and I'm sure you know more than stuff that ever came out too. So, I have a feeling that if the Lazar story's true, that you would know for sure because there would be elements to it that other people haven't, you know what I mean? That shit's been held back, that some stuff might have been held back that you guys knew that...
Yeah, the people that say, well, maybe he just convinced you of this story, and I say, well, look, on March 21st, 1989, I was over at Bob's house, and he said, do you want to go see a flying saucer tomorrow night? And I said, well, sure, what are you talking about? How? And he said, well, they're going to test fly one tomorrow at 9. And I said, great, where do we look from? And he said, there's a dirt road that goes into Groom Lake from the northeast, from Hancock Pass. And I said, yeah, I know, I've been on there millions of times. He said, we can park just before we get to the illegal area, and we'll be able to see it from there. And, the next night, me and Gene Huff and Bob's wife then, and I drove my motorhome up. Drove down to about where we thought we were still legal, drove into the desert, set up the scope, and there at 9 o'clock, here comes the flying saucer, and it came up from behind the mountains because there's a mountain range between the road and Groom Lake, and whether the saucer took up from Groom Lake or whether it took off from S4, which is somewhat to the south, I don't know. All I know is it flew around for a couple minutes, and I had my Celestron 8 telescope, and anybody that's worked with a Celestron 8 telescope, it's very difficult to track a moving object. But I finally got it locked in as it was descending, apparently for a landing. And I, saw the flying saucer, and I said, quick, Gene, take a look. As I moved away to let him look at it, my foot accidentally wrapped around the tripod, one of the tripods, and he didn't get to see it. So that was the big laugh of the night, that I was the only one that got to see it. But, for the people that say maybe he just told you a big story, and I said, well, it must be a pretty big story because he told me a day before when I was going to see the flying saucer, and took me out there, and I did see the flying saucer at the exact time he said it was going to be there, and it came up from Groom Lake. Now, some people say, well, maybe he was just a cook out there, and I said, well, if he was a cook, they certainly pass around a lot of secret information to the cooks.
Yeah. You kind of mentioned Steve Bassett, and what about that whole exopolitics movement that's going on? Now, you obviously are not anticipating disclosure anytime soon. It does seem like they do use a lot of information similar to the stuff that you talk about as far as the Dulce base and deals with aliens and interaction with aliens and stuff like that. Do you think they're just barking up the wrong tree?
Yeah, they're never going to get anywhere. I mean, they've got their hopes up. They've got congressmen lined up. They've got 1,000 people that will testify. It's not going to happen. They're not going to let it happen. It doesn't need to happen. Nobody needs to know about all this stuff, and they're certainly not going to force it.
Yeah. Now, what about the field of ufology? I mean, as we kind of said earlier about this schism that happened in the 80s, there's still a lot of people in ufology who are still, measuring it by the thumb in the air, as you said.
What about it?
What do you think they're doing? Is it just a dying field, or has it been infiltrated?
No,
maybe?
It seems that more and more people are catching on, and more sharp people. I don't get many emails during the day. I get maybe 10 or 15, no big deal. But every once in a while, there's a guy, comes on and asks a real intelligent question about, look, this stuff has got to be true. What can you tell me about this and that? But it seems to be more and more people really interested in it.
Interested in UFOs?
Yeah.
But what about just the field of ufology? I mean, they haven't advanced the science in 30, 40 years. Do we need some kind of new way of looking at it, or should we just wave the white flag and realize that we're not going to get the answers, or, what do you think?
Yeah, the thing is, they had the biggest story of the century, which was the Bob Lazar story, and most people didn't believe it. So what else are you going to do?
Yeah.
Take everybody for a ride?
Now, do you think that that's just like ego, and the idea that if it doesn't conform to what they believe already, that they're not going to jump on board with it, or is there some...
Yeah, all the people that are 40, 50, 60, they've been brought up to believe, there is no such thing. It's just planet Venus or the planet Jupiter. And it's their minds won't be changed. But the younger guys, 10, 20, 30, that are growing up, they've grown up with this, the Benowitz story, the Bob Lazar story, the Dulce story, stuff like that, stuff that just simply cannot be discounted. And also, YouTube has concentrated a lot of UFO pictures on there. So most people are believers. The really anti-UFOs guys that you see on the internet, most of them are paid to do that.
Government types.
Yeah.
Okay. And what about the whole idea that, ufology's been infiltrated? We talked about the Bill Moore thing, but, obviously what happened with NICAP and all that stuff. Without saying names or anything like that, do you think there's a Bill Moore of 2009 that if we found out they were actually, dissuading people or pushing them in the wrong direction or something like that?
I haven't heard of anybody doing that, have you?
No,
Was as big and as well known as Bill Moore?
No, well, forgive me for saying this, but aside from you, John, I'm trying to think of anyone else that...
I was going to say, I would be the logical guy.
As I said, it's up to the audience to do their own research into this, and it's not my job to tell them what to think, so...
Absolutely. Just ask the questions, and I'll answer them.
Exactly. So, hey, here's some revolutionary paranormal radio for you folks. I'm not going to tell you what to think. It's up to you to figure this all out. That's why we have John here. Now, I guess talk a little bit about the, as I said, you kind of inspired Art Bell to get the whole Coast to Coast thing up and running. What was that like, in a way, to really be at the ground floor of all that?
Art Bell was actually a news guy, just a regular on-the-radio talk guy. And talk about sports, talk about this, talk about that. And then one day he heard about me, and I was on his show, and he got so much response that he changed his whole format and skyrocketed in popularity. And he does give me credit for it, because when he got some award and it was announced in Time magazine, he said, John Lear is my mentor.
Yeah.
Now, we came to a parting of the ways. In 2003 or 2004, he interviewed a science researcher for Popular Science, and they had a whole issue on the myth of 9/11, and every myth that Art Bell would advance, this guy would come up with some BS answer, and Art said, that's what I thought, that's what I thought. In other words, Art, bought the whole, myth thing, to the forefront, and that he didn't believe that 9/11 was a conspiracy, and he didn't believe that, and he lost half his viewers, and eventually, he just essentially disappeared, and he's on every once in a while, and he will always be known for how popular he was, but the breaking point was that one show that he did on 9/11 and poo-pooed all the conspiracy theories, and he kept saying, yeah, just another wingnet conspiracy. So my avatar on everything that I did was a little wingnet spinning up and down on a screw.
Yeah, it was going to drive me crazy, so I just looked it up. It's Chertoff.
Chertoff, yeah.
Benjamin Chertoff was,
Ryan Chertoff.
And his uncle was the head of Homeland Security, I think, or something like that.
Yeah, it's his uncle that's the head of, Michael Chertoff is his name, right?
Yeah. One's Ben and one's Michael. I'm not sure which one's which.
Oh, Ben. Ben, that's the guy that was interviewed. He's the man.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, that's it. Now we got it straight.
Nice.
Thanks for looking that up.
Oh, no problem. It would have driven me crazy, and I figured you probably have the same mindset that I am.
It's an easy name to remember.
Now, I do kind of find it ironic, and again, I'm not taking a shot at you here. Just that, like, no matter what the area is, 9/11 and the JFK thing, you've said that the Mossad was behind the JFK assassination and the UFO thing. It seems like you're always like way beyond what everyone else is talking about. Do you know what I mean? Like the 9/11 truth movement isn't talking about holograms at all, really, as far as I can tell. I guess, what do you attribute that to?
Like I say, I'm so interested in secrets, and those airplanes, particularly the CNN video, an airplane crashing into a building. I mean, it cannot possibly happen like that. When the nose hits, the tail is going to come off instantly, because not only are those girders set 39 inches apart, but there was only 37 feet between that and the core. So when if any airplane got through the exterior, when it got to the core, which is 37 feet later, nothing else is going in. Everything's going to go to the ground. Tail, fuselage, whatever. But there was only, 3 or 4 pictures of stuff that came off airplanes. You put together 4 airplanes that allegedly crashed. That's 8.5 million parts. Every single one of those parts has to be made by a parts manufacturer authorized by the FAA, and everyone has to be stamped, engraved, or written on a part number. And so we've never seen a single part with a part number that could be traced to any of those airplanes. Also, there's 90 miles between the 4 airplanes of wire. Every single wire in an airplane is stamped every foot, and it has where it's going to, where it came from, and its energy limit, its electrical limit. And of course, there hasn't been one single foot of that found, not an inch of it found.
Yeah.
So, it's just ridiculous. No airplane crashed. In the Pentagon, anybody says, well, what's your best evidence that no airplane crashed in the Pentagon? I say April Gallup. She was a intelligence officer, civilian officer with the Navy, and her desk, or with the Army, her desk was 40 feet from that hole. She said she saw no airplane, no missile, no drone, no A-3, no small airplane, smelled no gas, smelled no diesel. All she heard was an explosion. And so she picked up her 6-month-old son, who was in his carrier at the base of her desk, put him over her shoulder, and climbed out that hole that the airplane allegedly flew into. And as far as Shanksville, it's ridiculous. An airplane can't disappear like that. It can't go into a ground. I don't care how soft the ground is. There's got to be some parts left more than that little piece of turbine that was in the scoop of the backhoe.
Yeah.
I could go on and on about 9/11.
I'm sure. The final 9/11, I guess, question sort of comes out of this whole theory that you're putting forward. Is just that, what do you think they did with all the people then who were supposed to be on the planes?
That's the biggest question that keeps people from believing that it was a hoax. They want to know, what did they do with the people that were in those airplanes? And I'll be damned if I know what they did with them.
Okay. And then just a throwback to what I was sort of asking you earlier, just how you're on a different path, I guess you could say, on a lot of these topics. Why do you think the general, for lack of a better term, mainstream, fields, 9/11 truth, ufology, all this other stuff, why do you think they're getting it so wrong if your stuff is right? Do you know what I mean?
They don't have the time to mess around and sit at the desk. I've been retired for 8 years now. I retired at 60, which is a mandatory FAA retirement age. And I started up a little gold mine, which the BLM shut down, and all I have is that. But like I say, I'm curious. I have an interest. How could this happen? How could that happen? Where did this rumor? I just love these interesting rumors, and there's so many books out with good stories, and I just follow them to the end. Find out what I think, whether it's true or false.
Fair enough. And as I alluded to earlier, you were tearing it up there in the 80s when I was barely alive. I was only a youngster. I guess what sort of advice do you have for people my age in their 30s and younger, because we have a lot of younger listeners, and we've been trying to push more young people having an interest in this. I guess, what sort of advice do you have for those people as far as, examining these mysteries?
Learn how to live your life with integrity and without envy, hate, or greed. That's all you need to know. You don't need to know about UFOs, 9/11, wars in Africa, starvation in Africa, starvation in Pakistan. That's not your job to worry about that. Your job is to worry about yourself. And what you need to worry about is living your life with integrity and without envy, hate, or fear, and expressing as much love to your family as you can. This doesn't mean a love you, darling, as you're heading out the door. This means taking your wife in your arms, looking her in the eyes and saying, I love you very much, darling, and doing that with your kids, too.
All right. One thing I did want to sort of ask you or sort of bring up, I guess, is just the sort of attitude in ufology and other areas of the esoteric, that this is like supposed to be, and I disagree with this point of view, and a lot of people seem to think that searching for these answers is some kind of like team sport, when really it's more of an individual search. And that kind of goes back a little bit to the whole Bill Moore thing. A lot of people begrudged him for what he did, but I don't, because my attitude really is kind of what I just said, that, you're on your own search for the answers, and you're not really beholden to everybody else, because chances are half the people are going to argue with you, and half the people are going to want more information out of you when you either can't produce that right away, or you have to keep some things inside. So I guess there's not really a question behind that. I just want your perspective on that whole idea.
My answer to that, if you want to know anything about UFOs, go over to ATS, AboveTopSecret.com, and read both the Sleeper's threads. Then buy his 2 books and read about it, and you will know more than 99.99/1000th of the people in the world. You will know the real stuff.
Okay. To the people like you and me who are on this search for answers and stuff, I guess what's your take on the whole idea that there's some kind of responsibility, I guess, to the field? Because I don't really agree with that, but in the greater sense.
Responsible for getting the information out?
Yeah.
No, I don't believe that anymore.
Okay, so we're on the same page there. There's a certain attitude, I guess, to sort of like elucidate it more. There's just a certain attitude that we're supposed to be responsible for each other and police this UFO world and that kind of garbage that I just don't agree with, because it's...
No, they'll find out if they're supposed to find out. If they're not, then, forget them. They live their own lives. We live our own lives.
There you go. That's almost the perfect way to end it. I just want to know where you see all of this headed as we go forward. You already sort of said, 3 or 4 generations, you and I are shit out of luck. we're going to just collect the information as best we can, but we probably won't get any answers. You think that's going to be the case?
It's a gradual thing now. There's more and more sightings of saucers, more and more crop circles. It's a gradual, though. The aliens will disseminate the information at their pace.
Okay. And just the last question, we kind of already talked a little bit about it, that, obviously Art and George Knapp give you a lot of credit for really jump-starting their interest in ufology. And as we said, you're one of the godfathers of Area 51. Do you ever, and I have a feeling that the answer is going to be no, because you have a strong sense of personal self, so probably not. But do you ever sort of get annoyed or upset that your contributions to the field have been kind of underappreciated over the last 15 years or so, since the 80s, when you really sort of burst on the scene and made such a huge impact?
No, and what I try to explain to myself, the interest that I express and the research I do is for me, not for anybody else. Occasionally I'll write something, but I don't feel it's my job or work to get any information out. It's all just for me.
That's exactly kind of what we were just talking about. So you said it better than I could have, and I appreciate that. All right, so of course we've plugged the website here, thelivingmoon.com. What kind of stuff are you working on right now? Now, obviously you've written a lot of stuff that's, these briefings and state of the field type stuff and postings at forums and stuff. Have you ever considered putting out a book or anything like that, or any sort of stuff that you might be working on you want to plug?
No, nothing I want to plug. Not doing anything.
That might be a first for a guest, so that's great. What about writing a book or anything like that? You ever thought about that? Even if it's like, I'm really wishing more people like you who've had such a rich history in the field would write an autobiography like Bud Hawkins just did.
My daughter is writing my book, and she started about a month ago, and I've just been sending her all my notes and all my papers, and she figures it'll take about 2 or 3 years.
Awesome. Well,
I'm just going to let her handle it how she wants to, and whatever tack she wants to take, fine with me.
Sounds good. I look forward to that eventually coming out, because as I said, I'm really a big student of the history of the field as much as the phenomenon in the skies, so I'm glad we got to cover a lot of that today here in our conversation. Well, we've come to the end here, John. I got to thank you for giving us so much time, for being so open and honest, and as I said, criminally underappreciated by some of the newer generation in the world of ufology. I hope more people take a new interest in you, especially as you've been sort of making this comeback over the last few years, and take a second look at what you have to say. And I got to thank you. We try to end it on a big note here at the end of the season, and I couldn't think of a better guy to end the season on than you. And the people that I shared the information that you were going to be the guest across the board, regardless of what they thought about what you had to say, had the same reaction, and that was wow. So I'm hoping that the BOA Audio audience feels the same way and really enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. I look forward to hopefully talking to you again in the future. Thank you for being our season finale guest this year.
Okay, and thank you.
That does it for the season finale of BOA Audio Season 4. Enormous thanks to John Lear for coming on the show and being our special guest here to close out the season. You can find out more from John at the website www.thelivingmoon.com. Pretty simple, all one word, thelivingmoon.com. Check it out. And thus concludes the 4th season of BOA Audio. First of all, let me roll through the thanks here for all of the amazing guests we featured on the program throughout the season. Brace yourselves here, it's quite a list, but I want to make sure we give them all their due and thanks for appearing on the show. Jim Mars, Dr. Stephen Rourke, Adam Davies, Charles Upton, George Knapp, Neil Gould, Gian Cassar, Stanton Friedman, Nick Redfern, Greg Bishop, Ken Gerhard, Ann Druffel, Adam Gorightly, Betty Mailer, Andrew Barnes, Paul Tate, Philip Spencer, Richard Dolan, Lauren Coleman, Paul Kimball, Micah A. Hanks, William Zabel, wherever you may be, Jason Offit, Tracy Twyman, Klaus Svan, Marie Jones, Larry Flaxman, the amazing Bruce Rux, Pastor Robin Swope, Timothy Good, Webster Tarpley, Bud Hopkins, and, last but not least, John Lear. What an array of guests, what an amazing collection of esoteric minds. It was really an honor and a thrill to be able to speak to so many top-notch researchers and rising stars in the world of paranormal studies. Thank you to all those great folks for appearing on Season 4 of BOA Audio, and I'm already looking forward to putting together the playlist for Season 5. Up next, as always, we've got to give some massive thanks to the outstanding staff at BOA. Let me go through the list of these folks for you. Leslie Gunter, Michael Chiron Brun, Regan Lee, Joe V, Tina Senna, Rochelle Hawks, Richard Thomas, Lasha Siniuk, A.M. Murphy, and our newest staff member, Marla Pena. Marla will be debuting at BOA on September 10th. Wanted to include her here in the thanks portion of the finale, since she has been on deck to debut at the website for quite a while, and we're really excited to be bringing her onto the team. Speaking of which, this awesome team of writers has produced countless quality columns and musings about the world of esoterica throughout the last year. They've really helped in taking BOA into a whole different realm. We're not just a podcast, my friends. We're not just an audio series. We are a complete esoteric think tank, and that is overwhelmingly due to the amazing work of the BOA staff. I can't thank them enough for their insight, their advice, their questions and guest suggestions, and most of all, their unending support and friendship. This program would not be possible without the help and support of the BOA staff. So kudos to them. Thank you so much. I know they're going to be shouldering the load of content at BOA until the big return for the program for Season 5 in November, and I'm thanking them in advance for that. They're going to still be putting out amazing stuff over the next 2 months while we work behind the scenes to get not only BOA Audio Season 5 up and running for you, but also to get BOA 2.0 ready for our November launch. We've been saying it for years here at the end of the program, but it is totally true, my friends. If you're only listening to BOA Audio and you're not reading the columns at Banal of America, you're only getting half the story. Check out the works of the BOA staff and make Banal of America a part of your everyday search for esoteric news and opinion. I'm not going to beat the drum too much here at the end asking you for donations, since we already did that at the beginning of the program, but I know that the people listening right now, they're the hardcore listeners. You stick around through the complete program, you listen to me ramble like a moron some weeks. You are the hardcore BOA audience, and I definitely want to turn to you now and ask you to please help us out and make a donation to the program and the website. I would really like to get the program into some solid financial footing as we begin Season 5, and that's why we're really pushing donations hard here on the season finale. 64 hours of esoteric audio, that's 24 more than last year, 35 guests, 3 additional episodes beyond our normal 31 episode order, and 8 hours of international esoteric audio. We produced all that this past season for all of you great folks out there listening, and we just gave it to you. There was no charge to listen to all this audio, and it's going to be there forever. And how do we do that? Pretty simple, via donations from the great BOA Audio listeners. That's how we pay the bills to make sure that Banal of America Audio is up and running. As I said, I'm not going to beat the drum here. You know how to do it. You go to Banal of America or the BOA Audio archive page, click the PayPal button, and make a donation. You know the routine by now. No donation is too small, and all donations go towards Banal of America and BOA Audio, keeping us up and running, commercial-free, and freely available for all of our great readers and listeners the world over. Obviously, there is no next week. We've already teased the return of BOA Audio in November. It is, of course, BOA Audio Season 5. For the hardcore listeners, I'll give you another little nugget of information. I'm really hoping to have the season premiere on 11/11/2009, so for those folks who stick around to the end of the program, you get a little inside info on when you can expect to hear the premiere of BOA Audio Season 5, and I'm pretty sure you know who the guest is going to be for that episode. During this off-season, what are we going to be working on? Of course, the Mass Mystery Weekend in October up here in Massachusetts, Watertown, Massachusetts. to be more specific, October 16th to the 18th. Nick Redfern, Lauren Coleman, Peter Robbins, Jeff Belanger, Nancy Talbot, Chris Balzano, and John Horrigan. 3 events stretched out over the weekend here in October. If you're a BOA Audio listener and you want to attend, get in touch with me, and I'm going to do my best to hook you up big time for the Mass Mystery Weekend. You can find out all about that at www.massmystery.com. Check that out for ticket information and more info on the speakers. That's one thing we're going to be working on in the off season. What about the other stuff? What about the stuff for the folks who aren't going to make the trip up to Massachusetts? I understand some folks can't do that. There's a lot of great listeners listening all over the world who may not be able to make the trip out here to Massachusetts. So what else are we working on for the great BOA audience? Obviously, as teased at the beginning of the show, a complete redesign of the BOA homepage and website in general. We're really going to gut this thing, and the folks we have working on it are really super talented people. Over the course of the history of BOA, I was the one who did all the coding and design for the website, so it had limitations as far as what we could do because it had to be from my knowledge base. That's not the case anymore. We have professional web designers who have volunteered to help us put together an amazing version of Banal of America that we're calling BOA 2.0. Send me your thoughts and your suggestions. I want to hear them for what you want to see at BOA 2.0. What kind of improvements and additions do you want to see at Banal of America? Now's your chance, my friends, to make a real impact and shape the BOA franchise. That's part 1. Part 2 of what we're going to be working on here in the off season is I'm going to do my best to really develop a more advanced recording technique for BOA Audio, try and change up the style of recording. We've been doing it the same way for 4 seasons now. It's definitely outdated. It's certainly technologically antiquated at this point, so I'm going to make a concerted effort to look into coming up with a new way of recording BOA Audio and making it the best sounding program we can. And the final thing of the big stuff we're working on here in the off season is fine-tuning the production end of the show. I know this season has been just wild in terms of lengthy delays between episodes and deadlines that have been passed. We're going to do our very best to eliminate a lot of the problems that happened this season. I want to make sure that BOA Audio Season 5 runs like a well-oiled machine, and that is definitely one of my goals here for the off season, to eliminate a lot of the fat that happens in the production end and make this as streamlined as possible so we can get the episodes out to you as soon as possible, because I know a lot of folks have been a little dismayed here during Season 4 that it's taken so much time for episodes to get out to you. I feel your pain. I am definitely one of the harshest critics of our scheduling style that is out there, and we're doing our best here in the off season to get a fix on that problem. Stay tuned to BOA, of course, over the next 2 months for more details on Season 5, on BOA 2.0, and all of our other plans as they emerge. As we've been saying the last few weeks, and especially here this week on the program, I want your feedback just because we're going to have some downtime here until November. That doesn't mean I don't want to hear from you. Now's the perfect time to write to us if you have guest suggestions, website suggestions, or just thoughtful critiques and feedback on the program. I definitely want to hear it, and we'll throw your email into the mailbag for BOA Audio Season 5. By now you should know the 3 methods to get in touch with me, but let me roll through the list for you really quickly. You can either A, write to boaaudio@hotmail.com, boaaudio@hotmail.com, or simply go to Banal of America and click the contact button. That's really easy. And the third method is a little more interactive. That is, of course, the official Banal of America forum, the US of E.com, THEUSOFE.com. Fantastic group of folks there. Love talking about the esoteric as well as the non-esoteric, and we always welcome newcomers to the forum. Come on over, join up, it's free, post your thoughts, or just lurk. We'd love to have you. So those are the 3 methods: email, contact button, or forum. Any of those gets your correspondence into my hands, and believe me, folks, I write back everybody who sends me an email. I get in touch with everybody who contacts me via the various methods: Facebook, Twitter, MySpace. I get back to everybody because I appreciate that you took the time to write to me, and I'm going to take the time to write you back. I want your thoughts and I want your feedback on Season 4 and on what you want to see in Season 5 and BOA 2.0. Finally, now, we've thanked the guests who appeared on the program this season. We've thanked the outstanding and infamous BOA staff. But there is still one large contingent of people we need to thank. The biggest thanks of all must go out to the amazing BOA Audio listening audience. I'm going to do my best not to get too choked up here. It's always really sad for me when we close out the season. I feel lost for the first couple of weeks after we've wrapped up a season, but next thing you know, I'm already up to my neck in work for the subsequent season, so I get over it pretty quickly. But I'm kind of sad here this week as we close the book on Season 4. It's been a super long season. I sometimes wonder if I dragged my feet wrapping up the season because I always sort of dread closing the book on another year of audio. But I want to really just thank the great BOA Audio listeners. You guys are awesome. I know it's been a roller coaster season. We've missed deadlines. There have been lengthy delays between episodes at times. But you've stuck with us. You've written us thoughtful and encouraging emails. You made the PayPal donations to help keep us afloat. And you continue to spread the word about this little sticky underground esoteric audio show with the weird name that is BOA Audio. Personally, I'm beyond humbled to know that thousands of people from around the world are listening to this program each week. I thank you from the bottom of my heart for letting me into your homes and your iPods for the last year, and I really look forward to when we can do it all again, and hopefully it won't be too long from now. If you'd told me 4 years ago when we started this whole thing that I'd be sitting here talking to you over 100 episodes later, over hundreds of audio hours later, that we'd still be going and we'd already be lining things up for a 5th season of the program, I just wouldn't believe it. But you guys made me believe it's possible. Episode after episode, season after season, you've been just amazing to me. You've treated me so well. You've put up with my foibles and my, at times, amateurish antics. And, you've been there for me, and I really appreciate it. And I'm going to miss you guys so much. We're going to be back in November, and we're going to be back bigger and better and more awesome than ever with BOA Audio Season 5, the 5th season of this program. It is really going to be something special, and I cannot wait to share it with the people who've made it possible. You are the fuel that drives this machine, and I will definitely reward you for that support over the last 4 years. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. You guys are the best. So we'll just wrap it up here because I could just keep talking and I'm going to get emotional. So we'll just roll right into the signature close. This is Tim Banal, thanking you for listening and signing off.